everybody. Welcome to InPsightRadio. I am your host, Danielle Egnew, and you are a fly on the wall to everywhere. How are you doing in the quarantine? How are you doing in the shelter in place? How are we hanging in there out there in the world? Isn't this something? I tell you what, I'm actually really enjoying my downtime. I mean, I'm still working. I'm still seeing clients. I'm still taking production meetings with Road Angel. You know, we're still, there's parts of my life that are still working. There are other parts of my life that are not working because, hey, we're in a shelter-in-place order. So it's an interesting time to be here, isn't it? I really think it is. And I've been receiving a lot of email. A lot of folks out there are experiencing some really heavy stuff during the time frame while we are all locked in by ourselves. Some of us are by ourselves. Some of us are with other people. And many of us are experiencing, feeling lots of buried emotions and whatnot. And it's, this is part of what we're here to go through, is to just come to the surface and breathe and recognize that we've been running from certain parts of ourselves. So that's never any fun, right? And in the middle of all this, in our shelter in place and our quarantines, we have parts of the country where people have been feeling like this is not a big deal, like they don't need to be sheltering in place for whatever reason. And I find this so interesting because we're dealing with an issue of biology. We're dealing with a virus that the more people who come into contact with it will share it. It's not a conspiracy. It's not that anybody's engineering the virus to kill anyone. It's not that aliens planted it up a Democrat's butt in order to kill the Republican Donald Trump. None of this stuff is true. This is what happens. This viral outbreak and such a spread of a viral outbreak is what happens when we have a population on the planet that's 2 and 3 times what the planet can actually sustain. This is the way nature just goes and thins out the crowd. This is tragic and it's horrible, yet this is a natural cycle of life. When anything gets overpopulated, disease ensues. And, as callous and god-awful as this is, to use this terminology, we are a human herd. And this virus is going through, and it's super tragic, and it's hideous that people are experiencing losses. Yet it really is thinning this herd out because we are so over capacity. This is a function of nature, gang. This is not a conspiracy, and it's not a false flag by the world cabal that has unleashed the COVID-19 virus to kill people all over and remove classes of people out. I mean, that is an excellent movie that probably somebody needs to make. And I'm not saying that there haven't been crazy eco-terrorists who have tried to create viruses that would kill a particular demographic of people. That's been going on since the Nazis, people. I mean, as god-awful as that is, it's true. It's been going on since the Nazi Party. So, when we're looking at all the anxiousness that's coming up right now in the ethers, and the last 2 days, gang, I have been hammered by it. I've just been hammered by it, by this horrible anxiety out there where people don't know what to do with themselves. They don't know if they're coming or going. And right now, we're seeing a really interesting need that the human species has to point a finger and blame and take all of our internalized pain and anguish and freak out and project it onto another person so that everything that's crunchy and crispy and god-awful feeling inside of us, we can just hang like a costume on a third external party and then point our finger at that party and say, you're the reason I feel so terrible. You're doing this to me. Instead of just looking inside of ourselves and saying, God, I'm afraid, man, this sucks. Who thought I would be stuck in my house? I have watched every Netflix show known to man. And I've moved on to 1980s disaster films. I mean, this is getting bad, right? So instead of just admitting to ourselves that things are a little Old West and things are getting a little scary and things are getting a little out there, Many people are creating these third-party blame systems in order to channel their own discomfort because that's what the old world taught us to do. And let me give you an example of this, okay? So right now, we love our political brands in the United States of America, and I am so not a political brand person. And this, quite frankly, makes people who are politically branded in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party really uncomfortable. I don't care if people are Democrats or Republicans. Technically, I'm a registered Democrat. But I do like to think for myself. I don't just move in this giant herd that goes around and says, moo, blue. I mean, I actually, look at people's records and what they do and whatnot. And my spiritual, social alignment seems to fall into play with folks who tend to run under a Democratic ticket. But that doesn't mean that I wouldn't vote for someone with an R by their name if they exhibited those same exact qualities. And we're not right now, the big national franchise D's and R's are very invested in both of their identities, right? And so as an example of what I'm talking about with this third-party blame mechanism, that really comes up when we're afraid. It's really interesting, right? What the old world taught us to do. Our old world taught us to avoid being ashamed at all cost, even if that meant burning a witch in order to draw the attention away from us, accusing someone else of witchcraft and burning them at the stake, just as long as we don't have to look at our own issues, right? So when I'm talking about the Republican or the Democratic franchises, it's interesting how when we as human beings, we want to assign blame somewhere, especially for this coronavirus crisis. And yes, now listen, blame and accountability are different. The President of the United States is not being accountable for his role in how the disaster preparations or lack therein were rolled out in the United States. That is accountability. One needs to be accountable. Yet that's different than blaming people for things. So let's just take a really stereotypical brushstroke here, okay, gang, to give you an example of what I'm talking about. So right after coronavirus came out, we had a lot of people who don't care for the president. So we'll just categorize for a second. We'll say all these Democrats out there saying, I'm blaming Trump for this. This guy's stupid. This is Trump's fault. It's Trump's fault. It's Trump's fault. Well, certainly the president of the United States, in my humble opinion, has been an absolute wipeout in terms of attempting to handle anything of this magnitude. That's an individual that in no way, shape, or form is prepared to emotionally, psychologically, or really economically deal with what he's been given to deal with. I mean, Trump doesn't even begin to have the tools in his chest to deal with 1/4 of what we're dealing with, okay, with coronavirus. So, to have people say, well, it's all Trump's fault. Well, it's, the buck stops with him. He doesn't think so. Yet the Democrats' cry was blame Trump, blame Trump. Well, I mean, in all honesty, it's not all Donald Trump's fault. As much as I roll my eyes personally at how this issue has been handled at a federal level, I in honesty cannot say it's all Donald Trump's fault. Because if a pandemic was one person's fault, wouldn't that be easy? Wouldn't that be great? We could just say, bad Donald Trump, repent, and the pandemic will be gone. Yeah, he has mishandled many things grievously. However, that was the Democratic battle cry is Trump, 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 it's Trump's fault. Okay, so that was the first freak out to come out. Well, now we've got the right wing or the Republican springback. So we've got Republicans who are freaking out about the shelter-in-place order and businesses being ordered to shut down. And now a month and some into this, now we're seeing that blame come out. And they're saying, we're blaming shelter-in-place. It's going to wreck the economy. We're blaming the Democrats. We're blaming this socialist system. And we're going to rage against shelter-in-place. And we've got this governor in South Dakota, God bless her pea picking heart. I do not know what she is thinking. South Dakota is now just racking up COVID-19 numbers. And this governor, who I think is representing a portion of our COVID-19 experiment, which is to ignore We've also got somebody down in, I think it's, gosh, is it Arkansas? No, Arkansas. I think it's Arkansas. I could be wrong. A governor down there who is not issuing a shelter in place. Yet Arkansas isn't blowing up like South Dakota. So now the blame, the Republicans are loving to blame this shelter in place, and it's against our civil liberties. And now they're writing tickets in certain cities when people show up to go to church, and they're giving people tickets for, congregating and whatnot. And you're seeing all this again. We're being stereotypical, gang. So here's the big brushstroke. All these conservative people out there saying, they're rattling up my civil liberties. They are threatening my religious freedoms, and blame. Right? So both of those sections of blame are nonsensical, because though Donald Trump does own, or should own, he'll never own, the accountability for anything. That's just who he is, gang. Remember Donald Trump from the 80s? He wasn't wandering around saying, oh, yes, I'm responsible for all these things. No, that's not who the guy is. Why are we expecting him to pole vault over 25 feet when he doesn't even hopscotch? I mean, come on, let's have realistic expectations, or lack thereof, for people. So that's where he's at. And no, people who are getting tickets in a parking lot in a church, their civil liberties are not jeopardized. Nobody is telling them they can't practice their religion. Thousands of churches nationwide are streaming. They have access to church. They just want to do what they want to do, okay? And they're mad that somebody is inconveniencing them, or they're mad that they can't get to a store they want to get to. I mean, we are all heinously, financially, and emotionally taxed and tapped out right now. So blaming and getting hysterical, I'm seeing all this stuff on Facebook right now. The blame Trump stuff, it kind of went around, and it did what it was going to do. And again, we need to hold that individual accountable because, he happens to be the president. And that's kind of a big deal. However, that's different than blame. We, the people, are the ones who decide whether this particular coronavirus spreads or not. And all of the people who might be listening out there that think your rights are taken away because your religious freedoms are taxed because you can't go to church and pack in there with 10,000 people. If my version of God came down to me, and my version of God said, I believed my version of God required a human sacrifice, okay? If I went out and cut somebody's throat and the police caught me and they said, what are you doing? And I said, well, my God demands a human sacrifice. And you can't arrest me because this is my religious belief. Well, the taking of human life would eclipse the religious belief, and I would get my happy butt arrested. So for those out there who are under the battle cry that my religious freedom is being infringed upon because I'm asked not to congregate, you can still worship your God. Just do it online. Please stop putting people at risk. So it's, and I'm putting this out there because we love to blame. And again, I'm putting all blame under fire, no matter what it is, because the energy of blame is deflection. And we deflect when we're afraid. And we also go back to old patterns that have always worked for us to try to gain control in situations where we feel we have no control. And let's be flat straight up about all of this, gang. None of us feel like there's any control right now. I personally am actually okay in that zone because I'm a weirdo and I recognize how very little control I have except for how I choose to deal with any given circumstance that plops in my lap. So I get that flow, yet there's a lot of people who don't. And I really want to bring this point into focus here because what we're working against here in America is being heavily, temporarily inconvenienced and frightened. Yet, because we are this society where we get everything at the snap of a finger or a drop of a hat, stick in your euphemism there, we don't know how to handle feeling uncomfortable and just sitting with our fear. We have to blame somebody for it. And again, I'm not saying that our president shouldn't be accountable or people who made mistakes along the way. Any of them. World Health Organization in China, anybody shouldn't be accountable. Yet when we turn someone's mistakes into a spear and we stab them until they're dead with this spear to kill the mistake in that person, there is zero room for reparation. There is zero room for apology because we're just going to kill them and stomp them to the ground. What we're actually doing is that's a form of self-loathing. If somebody really boffed it, really boffed it, and came to me and said, Danielle, I have completely bit it in this area. And they are accountable for it. They apologize. I can see that they are learning because we're all learning people. We all have this little tiny version of ourselves that will compromise our dignity at any time by losing its crap and acting in fear and blame and hatred. And we all have that potential. And so when we want to blame, it's this person, it's that person, we put a label on something, we can stab it with our steely knives, but we just can't kill the beast. Boom, 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 boom. When we want to do that, we've got to realize that we are projecting onto that person the self-hatred that we have in ourselves for our own ability to absolutely selfishly make mistakes. When we cannot forgive, when we want to run somebody up a pole, when we want to blame, and the President of the United States is the king blamer of all time. And as he continues to blame, all I can see in him is this individual who is full of such self-loathing for his own mistakes. Think about that he can never admit that he is at fault because the poor guy, man, was taught, I'm sure, by his father to project every weakness he has inside of himself onto somebody else and then to verbally stab them through with it and wipe his hands of the problem. And that's an American way of doing things, gang. We are getting a chance at the highest level of government to watch the buck get passed. Yet how do we do that in our lives? And, we look to the President of the United States. I don't care who it is. If it's George W. Bush, if it's Barack Obama, if it's Bill Clinton, if it's Ronald Reagan, Jimmy Carter, I don't care who it is. If we are looking to the President of the United States, we want that person to be a little superhuman, don't we? That's why we elect a president. We want somebody with a level head and a calm mind. And we want, this is what I want in a president. Maybe some people want a warrior. I don't know. However, I want a level-headed, calm mind human who can factor in many ideologies, do the best they can with sometimes the crap pie that they're handed, and come out with temperance, dignity, and respect for all life, all people, and to resort to any sort of physical action, like a military action or whatever, as an absolute last resort. That's what I'd love to see in my ideological world. Yet when we look at the president, and this isn't the thing about Trump, I'm just talking about issues we project onto people. And Donald Trump happens to be the president right now. So if I am projecting onto Donald Trump, everything that I just rattled off to you is important to me, I'm going to be super disappointed. So why do we do this? Why do we expect someone like a president to be superhuman? Well, because they're the person that we are trusting to be in charge of everything. And when we trust people with responsibilities, we expect them to be accountable for the trust that we've laid at their feet. And currently we have a president in office who does not feel it is his responsibility to be accountable. So there's a big disconnect in the role of leadership and what people expect from a leader overall and how Donald Trump does business in the White House. There's just a huge disconnect there. Yet again, if I want to blame one person for an entire pandemic, well, that's just handy for me, isn't it? Yet that really isn't the case. I should probably be a little irritated with the person in the grocery store line who is right up next to me and coughing and not covering their mouth. And literally within a foot or two from me, I've had that happen a couple of times. And I've politely said things to people like, would you mind please stepping back? And it's the people who think that this is all garbage and it's stupid and it's all a conspiracy that are wandering around coughing in people's faces because the person I asked to step back, and that's obviously a generalization. I'm sure there are people out there who think this is all hogwash, who are still keeping a respectable social distance. So I want to acknowledge folks out there who are those people. However, a person who is coughing in your face and acting like it's not a big deal, that's somebody who's in a significant amount of denial about what's happening right now. And so America, and the world might be also, but obviously I live in the United States. So I'm talking from an American perspective here to our international listeners. However, America, we are in a massive exercise with denial. And denial's huge. And, I may not like the fact that coronavirus is among us. I may not like the fact that it's so easily transmitted if from spit and touching your own eyes and nose and all these things. I may not like that, yet it's true. And when I see people arguing with data, I don't like to say facts because facts are funny. My fact could be different than someone else's fact. It's a fact for me that off-worlders are real beings, that ETs, extraterrestrials, are real. That is a fact for me because I've communicated with them. Now, to somebody who doesn't believe that fact, they're going to think I have a mental illness, and I've concocted all of that, and maybe I have some schizophrenic subset, and while I'm hearing voices in my head, I think they're aliens. So that won't be a fact for them. However, data is different. Data can be manipulated, but data in its raw format is simply data. And when the data comes out and says this is a virus and it's killing a bunch of people, and we have a governor in South Dakota who is going through an exercise of dismissal of the data, it's really interesting to watch. And at that point, I start to step off of the social experiment called, being in quarantine. And I start to look at how we're all playing our role in this particular experiment. And I started off with the blame game because it's very important that all of us stop blaming and we go into personal accountability. Sure, I could stand there and get on the blame Trump bandwagon. Oh, sure. But maybe I should just ask the guy who's actually coughing on me in the Albertsons line to take a step back. Or should I call Donald Trump and tell Donald Trump that it's his fault that the guy's in the line coughing on me? The accountability is with the person coughing on me. You see what I'm talking about here? So we all are the president. I will say this a million times till it makes everybody sick to their stomach because they're so sick of hearing it. Every one of us in the United States of America are the president. We are all defining the character of this country. Now, the one thing that we don't have to do is all the sloggy admin that the POTUS has to do. However, if we start with being accountable first with ourselves, then we're going to be a lot less resentful when we are presented with individuals who lack accountability. I mean, think about this. If I'm dodging accountability in my life, I'm going to be triggered by other people who dodge accountability. And I'm not saying that it shouldn't inflame people that a world leader is not being more responsible. Again, this is an individual who just is lacking that skill set to be a world leader in the first place. Okay. So it's not like Donald Trump went into the presidency and then just fell apart. He never was that guy. So if we're going to play the blame game, we just get down the hole of non-accountability ourselves. And so when I step off of this social experiment called the quarantine and I look at what's happening in South Dakota, I can't help but wonder, is the governor of South Dakota, Kristi Noem, I think that's how you pronounce her name, Kristi Noem, is she simply playing her part in creating a control group for our giant sociological pandemic study? Now, let's just speak about Petri dishes for a minute. What's going on in South Dakota is actually It's quite hair-raising. I have a dear friend who lives there, a couple of them actually, and they both have reported to me that the public officials, the mayor of Rapid City and other public officials, city council members, were receiving death threats from people in South Dakota, from businesses or business owners or who even knows, threatening them that if they put a shelter-in-place order and close businesses, they got death threats through that. So I'm not sure if somebody has Kristi Noem up against a wall, if they're blackmailing her, or if this is just honest to God her belief system that this is not a big deal and it's all going to blow over because we're, the edge of the Great Plains and we don't have many people out there, says South Dakota. I don't know. Yet when I look at the denial that's involved here and the ignoring of data, again, we're not talking facts or truths, we're talking data. When I look at this, I can't help if universally, for some reason, let's just speak in terms of hypotheticals here. Maybe there were all of these souls in South Dakota who signed up for this experience to say, I'm going to go ahead and live in a state that doesn't really do any controls on this. And we say, hey, be smart, stand socially distant from one another, but we're not really going to shut down businesses. We're just going to let it roll. So that we will see this massive caseload and this massive death toll that is to come in South Dakota. We haven't even begun to see that tip over yet. We're seeing people come down with coronavirus. We're not seeing the deaths from it yet. And as we are confronted with this data, we are going to watch what happens when we ignore Mother Nature. When we pretend that Mother Nature can't kill us. When we pretend that the almighty dollar in the American economy has the last ace on top of the deck on the cycle of life. When we pretend that, people die. So I can't help but wonder if Kristi Noem is in some way playing her role as the person who just lets it all play out and lets it run amok. And she's not the only governor doing it, yet it is particularly bad in South Dakota, again, because of the community standoff out there. Now, I do know a lot of wonderful people in South Dakota who are sheltering in place, who are freaked out that everybody's wandering around acting like this isn't a big deal. So I'm not saying all of South Dakota is participating in this. I'm talking about one individual called the governor because the buck stops with her in her decision making. And I'm saying that we as a nation are going to watch those South Dakota death rates just skyrocket. And it is tragic and it's awful. Yet you can't stop people from doing what they're going to do or from being who they are. So when we watch that data come in, we are going to see irrefutably that if you ignore a pandemic, people die. And that's going to be one heck of a lesson for that governor. Just in the same way that we've watched Donald Trump, who, of course, nothing is ever his fault, right? And like I said, I laugh about that because he's been this guy since 1980. So none of this is new. Yet, when I look at this, I see that people observing the data, it will change their opinions. Now, there's always going to be folks, gang, who ignore data for the data they create in their head. And this is, to my definition, some people would call that strong manifestation. I tend to think that when we absolutely positively ignore data, as if it's not even on the planet, I think that can be delusional. I think that we can look at data and decide we don't care for it and maybe make efforts to change that data energetically and sociologically and maybe make some efforts towards manifestation that way. Yet to completely ignore what is in front of your face is denial. And so the stage in our pandemic that we are in at this point is denial. What parts of ourself have we been denying? Again, let's just admit, everybody, that we've all got that inner 4-year-old that has something that's going to push a button in us occasionally if we've not dealt with our crap properly, that's going to blow up and act like a dork and blame somebody for our poor choice making. Because that's what the old world taught us to do. By God, don't let the buck stop with you. You'll be ashamed of yourself, and God forbid you experience shame. And shame was, as I talk about all the time, was such a major crowd control tool especially since the founding of America. The fabric of America is stitched together with shame. And we are in this process of unraveling all of this and saying, listen, we all are afraid to be called out. We all are afraid to look inside of ourselves and see our own biases and fears. And I'm not saying you can't have your opinions and be opinionated and scream and yell about whatever you want, yet to solely blame isn't going to work. It's not going to work. Not in the feminine time frame, not in the yin time frame, not in the time frame we're in. So if we're going to focus on the lesson of denial that we're now in, it really caught my attention. This huge social media push lately, talking about not just conspiracy with the coronavirus, because that's been going on since day one. Good Lord. We have a lot of frustrated people who should be writing revised X-Files episodes for as creative as people can get, and rock on with your creativity. But let's just remember, that probably isn't true, although rock on with your creative genius. However, when we have the opportunity to go back and look at where we're at now, people are tired, gang. People are getting pissy. Okay? People love their spouses, but they're getting sick of spending 24/7 with their boyfriend, girlfriend, wife, husband, partner. People are getting sick of it. And instead of simply taking themselves for a spin around the block or going and gardening by themselves for a couple of hours, we are taught under the imbalanced portion of the patriarchal part of our society, which was not the balanced divine masculine. It was a bunch of blustery, look at me energy. We're taught that we have got to fight it. We've got to fight that uncomfortable feeling. So here we are on our timeline. We're in the denial section of coronavirus. And I want to caution us all. And I'm talking to me too. I'm just a person too. I'm talking to myself here. I want to caution us all about going down that rabbit hole of discontent because we're getting a little stir crazy, because that's what we've been trained to do. A textbook example of this crispy freak out blame. I got to put my discontent somewhere and get my pitchforks and my baseball bats and rage against my own discontent because I just want to be a poopy pants baby and cry, but I'm feeling too intimidated, embarrassed to do that. So instead, I've got my pitchfork. Arrgh, look at me. I'm tough and I'm terrifying. And we can look to Wisconsin for this particular lesson. Right now, in Wisconsin, protesters are entering state parks and demanding they be reopened. And they're saying things like, this isn't Nazi Germany. And these people are losing their ever-loving minds, freaking out about all of this. And people are making comments and I'm getting this out of a Newsweek article here, people are making comments saying these about being in the public park. Okay, they're saying, these are my constitutional rights. I have a right. I'm just tired of what's going on. Somebody said to a news station out there. And they're talking about the governor who shut down the dang parks because people wouldn't frickin' stop hanging on each other in them. And they littered and they don't have the personnel to get out there and clean the parks up. People are acting just entitled and spoiled and raging because they can't have their conveniences that they're used to. And this individual who says, these are my constitutional rights. There is nothing in the Constitution, I'm sure, of Wisconsin that says during a pandemic you get to hang out in a park. That's ridiculous. I mean, we don't even know what's in the Constitution. And people say this all the time. It's a free country, and then this other person makes another comment in this article, another protester who said, this is insanity. It's gone way too far. We don't live in Nazi Germany. No, we don't. And to be acting like we do because you can't get your happy ass to a park is a screaming spotlight on that particular person's entitlement complex. Really? You're going to equivocate the death of millions of people and Jewish people and gay people and Catholic people in concentration camps with your happy ass not being able to get to a park? Pardon me, folks, but are you shitting me with this? America? What in the hell? We've gone crazy. My God, it's all that, you know what it is. We're sitting inside. We're not exercising. We're eating a bunch of corn syrup and we're going nuts. You know my thing against corn syrup. We're all going crazy sitting there eating gummy bears and binge watching crazy disaster movies. And we're twisting ourselves sideways, America, for frick's sake. My God. And this is another protester that says there's no reason that this should be the way it is. It's an overreach by our governor, and this has got to stop. Well, it's not an overreach by the governor, because as you go on to read the article, you find out that the parks were open. Yet people abused the privileges. They would not keep the social distancing parameters into place. And they littered and they trashed the park, which means that park employees, city employees have to go in there and clean up all that stuff. And who knows what germs are on that? Because obviously, if I'm a person in a park and I don't care about social distancing and I don't care about being a coronavirus carrier, potentially, even if I have no symptoms, I could be leaving all kinds of junk all over that cup or that straw or whatever else. So I'm putting another person in jeopardy because of my entitlement. Okay? This is what denial does. This is what denial ends up looking like. So as we go down this article, this poor governor is just trying to keep people safe. Yet people aren't doing what they should be doing, but they are blaming the governor for shutting down the parks. Now, again, if they would have kept their happy butts apart and didn't litter, the parks would still be open. But let's not take any accountability. Let's call Wisconsin Nazi Germany and say our constitutional rights are taken away. Are they now? I mean, honestly, and I am laboring this point for just a minute. However, I'm trying to demonstrate the consequences of denial, entitlement, and lack of accountability. And we are here, gang. If you've been listening to these podcasts for the last month or so, I was talking about how things were going to get a little Old West, about how we were going to see some mob action, how people were going to lose their ever-loving mind. We are here, and we have choices to make. We can either calm our butts down, stop equivocating our own irrational behavior in a park with Nazi Germany when the repercussions of our crap-ass behavior are brought to us that we should be accountable for, okay? We can either calm down and just be with ourselves and be with this discontent, or we're going to end up in a freaking Newsweek article looking like a cray-cray person, okay? That choice is ours. We get to be accountable in these moments. And I personally don't want to end up in a Newsweek article. That's a little embarrassing. We have protests right now in Michigan. Michigan! Good old Michigan! You know, the governor there has, of course, the shelter-in-place order and businesses are closed and whatnot. And protesters went bat crap crazy over there and have been storming their Capitol building and just being upset, taking off masks, getting out of their cars, and saying that they feel, again, the same type of thing. Their rights are violated and this has gone too far and she needs to open businesses and whatever. And the protest in Michigan was called Operation Gridlock. Okay, and they drove up cars and they got out of the cars and they screamed and yelled and they're chanting that, oh my God, we need to open up Michigan. And what's so crazy here is that they are going to get each other sick doing this. And, Michigan, when we look at this, Michigan has got the third, I think it's the third largest coronavirus issue in the United States right now. And these people are just mad. And here's what's weird, okay? So they're out there without their masks on, congregating in large areas, lots of them, screaming and yelling about how they need to open the state up. And this is going to continue to get worse, by the way, gang, until we can get our heads on straight, which is why I'm being a little more pointed in this podcast in the hopes of really speaking some common sense to folks today, because all those people who got out there and yelled and screamed and said, we don't need to social distance and this is stupid, put themselves at risk. They put their whole group at risk. And they were waving Trump flags and Confederate flags and a few American flags. Okay, so to me, If we're going to talk Nazi Germany, come on, man. Who's creating Nazi Germany here? The rest of us are just trying to stay inside and not eat as many gummy bears so we don't emerge from quarantine at 1,600 pounds. My God. So, this is going on in Michigan, and there are other horrible protests that have been going on in Ohio, in North Carolina, and it's a large conservative, they're calling it, the conservative movement that's putting it out there is calling it a conservative movement. I'm not. They're calling it, Operation Gridlock is calling itself a conservative movement to take back America. And so what I'm not understanding about this is I am looking at this denial of data. And hey, I don't like not being able to go to my grocery store as often as I'd like. And I don't like that my favorite restaurants are closed. And I am really dying to go out and do tequila shots with a group of people. But that's not going to happen right now. And my constitutional rights are not violated. And this is not Nazi Germany. Because I do not need to project my fears onto other people. When people are showing up waving Confederate flags and Donald Trump flags and a few American flags in there, that's its own movement of fear. And that is a consciousness. So while the South Dakota governor is saying, well, we're just having a free-for-all and people are going to continue to get sick over there, we're having protests of people who apparently are ignoring data, and maybe it is part of their soul journey to contract a disease they thought was not real. Maybe that's the lesson they're trying to call into themselves to say, I'd like to learn about cause and effect. I'm not here to judge those people's path. I do think it's a little weird as we look at a large pandemic that this Operation Gridlock or this, as they call it, I'm not calling it a conservative movement. These folks are calling themselves, they are saying it's a conservative movement to take back America in multiple states. So, it kind of reminds me, it's nonsensical to me, the logic behind this. It reminds me of how armies used to fight back in the late 1700s when the British Army would line up in lines and shoot muskets, and the people behind them would have their muskets ready, and the people would shoot and then either step back to load their gun or be handed another loaded gun, so they were constantly shooting rounds. And it didn't occur to the advancing army to not get within, round shot. The other army would stand right in front of them, and they would just shoot at each other till there was nobody left. It didn't occur to somebody to attack from the side, be a guerrilla warrior. Oh no! We've just got to keep shooting at each other till we're all dead. And I see this exercise in denial in our country right now as those lines fighting a war that's pointless. This isn't about constitutional rights. And the denial that I'm talking about here, when we are confronted with changing a belief system, when we're confronted with this, we do one of two things. Generally, most of us, if you're a human being, most of us at first elbow lock that idea, get really crispy and resentful, and act like a poopy pants baby for a few minutes or weeks or years. Yet when most of us are confronted with enough data to rationally weigh the data, then if our belief system is challenged by the data, then we have to make some changes to our belief system. Now, if my belief system is lock, stock, and barrel groupthink, and it can't change, or I will no longer have an identity, then I'm going to do things like show up to the firing line 20 yards away from another guy with a gun and start shooting. Because I'd rather die than have to reevaluate my belief system. And, it's insane that there are individuals right now who are politicizing a pandemic. And again, we are going to hold anyone who is in charge, whether it was Obama, Jesus Christ, Donald Trump, we would hold that person accountable for how they handled as a leader a disturbance, or in this case, a giant-ass pandemic. However, when we're looking at this focus of denial, we all, gang, are being asked, I don't care who you are, to adjust our belief systems just a little bit. I mean, I was having a great conversation with one of my cousins, and he had stopped by, and I'm standing on the grass, and he's over by his car, and we probably got a good 12 feet actually between us, and we're just visiting, and we were talking about money. And he brought up the fact that, right now he's not working and state of Montana's tapped out and our payroll protection plan is tapped out until Congress reapproves a new round. And they will. Yet, I'm looking at all this and we're talking. And my cousin says, what are they going to do? Come back and repossess my house? And he lives in a beautiful but very modest middle America, nice house, right? And built in the 50s like everything else in Billings, Montana. And so he said, what are they going to do? Come and get it? I said, who are they going to sell it to? Who are they going to foreclose? What are they going to do with all the people they throw out? The whole system, gang, is locked down. And we are in the denial section of what's happening to us. And denial is also one of the stages of grief, gang. We are grieving the loss of what we thought was the American way of life. And that American way of life has been DEAD, dead, DEDDD, dead on the slab, dead on arrival, dead for decades. And what we're seeing now is that, quote, American way of life that we love to believe in because we're hopeful people here in America, gang. We're optimistic. We want to believe we're cool. We have cool neighborhoods. We're cool humans. We want to believe our economic system is that same old 1950s build it from scratch, or actually 1920s build it from scratch, or 1910 build it from scratch. Hasn't been that way for a very long time. Yet when we look at the American way of life going away, we are confronted with the fact that it hasn't been here. Because when you have a paycheck to paycheck society, which is exactly what the United States is, the paycheck to paycheck people are footing the bill for everybody pretty much. That paycheck to paycheck society is not stable. And that's actually debt enslavement. When we go into that charging up our credit cards and thinking it's normal and all these things, well, we're shaking that off right now. We are in denial, which is one of the stages of grief. And actually, different people are in different stages of grief throughout this process. So this denial is part of it. And the stages of grief are interesting. There's denial, numbness, and shock. That's the first one. This isn't happening. This isn't happening. This isn't happening. So for people out there who say are part of this self-proclaimed conservative movement to protest this virus, many of those people from the onset of this was saying, this isn't happening, this isn't happening. So they were in that denial phase, okay? And then there's the bargaining phase when you're in grief. And that's a stage of grief that can be really, marked by thoughts about what could have been done to prevent the death or the loss or the issue, And so there's been a lot of the bargaining section that's come out as blame. What should we have done? We should have done this. We could have done that. He's at fault. China's at fault. Somebody's at fault. So the bargaining, some people are in the bargaining portion, while some people are still in the denial. This isn't happening. What is going on? Then there are people who have gone on to the next stage of grief, which is depression. And that's pretty much where we start to recognize, oh, holy crap, this is real. And I'm past the numbness. I'm past this isn't happening. I'm past the who do we need to blame for this? And if we look at the who do we need to blame for this portion, that's also going on in all these states where people are like, this could have been done, that could have been done, this is being done wrong. That's also part of the bargaining aspect. There's a lot of people who are in the depression aspect right now. And then there's the anger stage of grief. And that's a common one. And that's happening when folks feel helpless and powerless. And that anger can come from a feeling of powerlessness or abandonment. And sometimes we just need something to be mad at because anger is an old program that we can run and it's something we feel we have control over. And then pretty much at the very end of it, we get into acceptance. And that's where we're just like, oh, holy crap, well, we're here for the long haul. So I think that we've all gone through different varying versions of that. And the two that we're seeing in these explosive strange protests with these odd comments. And I'm sorry, I am a human being, and I do think those are odd comments. Just those people are entitled to their comments, yet I think they're odd, given the fact that we are not the only country suffering with this illness. Poor Spain. Spain is so much smaller than the United States and has this raging death toll. Per capita, that's so much death over there. Yet all we can think about is, I can't get to my park. It's Nazi Germany. I'm like, really? Wow. Wow, man. Go watch a rerun of the Super Bowl and calm down. So pretty much here, acceptance. Acceptance will be the most helpful place for all of us to come to. And that's, in time you come to terms with all those emotions and feelings that everybody's experiencing when all this craziness went down. And once we get into the acceptance space, then we can start to heal and put together a constructive plan that can honestly be part of the accountability section of how we can all be part of the process. But what we're seeing right now is we're seeing a combination between denial, bargaining, and anger. And sometimes depression isn't just being quiet in your house. Aggravated depression is really harsh for people. That's when you're very, very depressed, but you're raging because you just can't handle how uncomfortable you feel. So if we think about this denial section, the numbness, the shock, and then going into the bargaining, what we should have done, you could have done this, we're not putting up with this, those are still some very beginning portions of the grieving process. And again, we are grieving the loss of a very cushy way of life, even though we might not have felt that way. And believe me, there's plenty of people in the United States who sleep on the street, who are working 3 jobs, who do not have a cushy way of life. And I guarantee you, those are probably not the people yelling and screaming about it being Nazi Germany and their rights constitutionally being taken away because they can't get their happy butt to a park. I guarantee you those people working 3 jobs probably don't have that much time to complain. I'm just saying. So when we look at where we're at, let's all be okay with admitting that maybe it's just a little scary to give away the ideology of the America that we were trying to sort of kind of hopefully keep alive in our minds somewhere. Maybe that's a little scary. Maybe it's a little demoralizing. Maybe we don't know who we're going to be on the other side of losing so much money in the stock market. Maybe we should just go into acceptance that this is happening. It's not going anywhere. And we will have far worse pandemics. You give us 10 years from now when those polar ice caps melt and everything goes airborne. Okay, this is a test run for how we handle data. And, rather than judge all the people in South Dakota and, these folks who are just storming these capitals, I still don't understand it. I honestly do not understand that mentality, but they probably don't understand mine. And so that's okay. We'll just call it a day and toast our beers and continue onward. Yet those folks are playing a role, just as I am with this podcast, in watching cause and effect play out. Because if we're going to go into a slow grief cycle with something as massive as a pandemic and act out in denial and bargaining and anger, then it's going to make it a longer term for all of us being shut in the house because people just won't get it together. Or those poor, God bless those folks, they're just going to get sick. So we're going to step back and take a look at everybody who's getting sick. And it doesn't mean that everybody's dying of COVID-19. I know people who have, and it's horrifying. I have a very close family friend, who's like a family member, who contracted COVID-19, and it was terrifying for their partner to care for them. And their partner is not super healthy either. And there was lots of occasions where that individual was thought that they might not make it, they might die. And that person is younger than me. I'm 51, they're in their 40s. And they're a healthy person. So when we talk about denial, let us all come to a place of acceptance. Because if we can just understand that human nature is to be afraid and rage and grab your pitchfork, but it's not going to work this time around, gang. It's not. And let me give you a future cast here. We are going to see more and more and more of these protests and violence come up, which is going to require law enforcement response. So these people who are in these conservative groups are going to create their worst nightmare, which is an oppressive government taking their rights away. They will create the hell they are gunning for to justify their fear, to justify this paranoia. They will create a real-world scenario until law enforcement must respond because they are in denial about what's happening, and they are attempting to paint a world in their image because they are not ready to mourn the loss of this ideology in our country that has died dozens of decades ago. They're just not ready. So they'd rather go down on the battlefield than deal with this. And I have actually at the bottom of it, I mean, I was kind of making fun of a few of these folks, I'll be honest, in this article earlier, because in the Newsweek article, because I just don't understand it. Yet I will say that, stepping off of that moment in time and looking at these people, I really do. The underbelly of my eye roll to that behavior is fear for them. If I were to really evaluate why I had such a strong reaction to that, it's fear for them, and it's fear for other people that they will come into contact with. And that's not fear consciousness. That's just a data issue. Because when I look into these people who think that this isn't real, I see a lot of death, and it makes me really sad. These are people with families. These are people who love them and depend on them. And for some of these people, that denial is going to kill them, and it's going to kill people they love. And that is so heart-wrenchingly sad to me, that sad then turns to this defensive reaction of why is this happening, and then can come out as an incredulous, sardonic anger. But what's under that in me is a sadness. That just because we are unwilling to truly face the data and face the death of what we wanted to believe was there, that we are willing to put ourselves in that firing line and shoot musket balls 30 feet away from each other while we all drop dead. That makes me sad. Now, I am not, of course, God, and I'm not the judge of the world. So all of those people's spiritual lessons are their own. And I want to point out that for those who have been following my blogs and my Twitter account, you can find me on Twitter at Danielle Egnew, Egnew, or my Facebook account, same thing. You're going to notice that for months, I've been talking about the fact that the first part of this year was going to be fireworks, the second part's a little easier, yet we are going through huge growing pains. And for those of you that followed my end of the year podcast back in December of 2019, I was talking about weird illnesses that were going to come through in 2020. Weird illnesses with the lungs and all these other things. So what we're getting a chance to see here is, how do we respond to grief? How do we respond to change? Are we willing to take down dozens of other people because of our own entitlement, because we just don't want to believe something? And, I've got some practitioners in my field right now that are irritated with my approach to this. They are irritated because they feel as though I am not encouraging enough love and enough high vibration and enough frequency uplift and all these things. Well, there are a number of practitioners out there who are doing a beautiful job with that. My call, the information I get, the data stream I get, is to break down why we're doing what we're doing so we can stop doing it, because it's not going to help us in the long run. And, yes, there's this school of thought that says everything universal is in its divine right timing and everything's happening for a reason, and that is true. Yet we still must be accountable for our actions, and we ultimately shape the future. And we have a timeline about mid-June where all of this kind of fades out and we're back among them. And we also have a timeline around October where foolishness and denial continue. And I say foolishness just because I mean, if I'm standing in front of a flamethrower and I'm getting burned, and then I'm blaming the person who's got the flamethrower about me being burned because I ran in front of the flames, there's no accountability there. And then I hug the person next to me and I'm on fire and I catch them on fire. And I keep pointing to that person. It's the flamethrower. It's the flamethrower. If we cannot learn accountability in this exercise, we are not going to make it when a bigger pandemic hits us. And the sad portion of this, and this is the part that really gets me, is the sad portion of this is that we are not going to, not all of us are going to make it through this social experiment. And the more in denial we are, rather than accountability, if you want to go and raise your vibration and kill the coronavirus, go for it. Yet you've got to be accountable for your vibration, right? You can't just run blindly through acting like it's not happening. If you're going to raise your vibration, you have to be 1,000% in line and accountable for every thought that you're having. Denial and accountability cannot be in the same place at the same time. And, people can say, oh, well, this person was able to escape fire or escape death because they didn't realize that there was a trap door there and they were so relaxed when they fell through the door that they lived when they fell to the bottom. That is different. That's called an accident that your guardian angels probably were working overtime on. That is not the same thing as active denial. So I just want to let us know that we have so many choices to make in the coming months. And this is where it's really going to get gritty, folks. Remember to be kind to yourself. Remember to be kind to people who might irritate you. Remember that we can blame and blame, but it's not going to fix anything because the buck stops with us. If you can't stand the way that Donald Trump shirks his responsibilities, then do not shirk your own responsibilities. Try not to be ragingly angry with people wagging Trump flags who are not being accountable for their part in this pandemic because their hero is not accountable for his part in this pandemic. Like attracts like. What a shock. Let us just go into a place of being within ourselves. And within this place of being, we can find compassion. We can find rest. We can find acceptance. That these are the very beginning cornerstones, keystones of the new earth that we are building. Yet we've got to go through this phase, gang. Okay? So let's just keep our heads. Let's send a lot of calming energy to those people who are trying to create the hell there sure exists so they can justify their belief system. Let's send them some love. Let's do our best to not blame. Let us not wait in denial or be the queen of it. Like the country song, Queen of Denial. Get it? It's a Costas song. Never mind. Everybody go out there, take deep breaths, and just remember, try not to eat so much corn syrup because it will hamper your decision making. Yeah, jacks us all up, makes us a little crazy in our quarantine huts. All right, you guys. Everybody take care. Do your best to remain calm, and I will see you next week.